Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, Oz is out today. Oz is out today. I know some of you think I can't do anything without Oz here. We're going to find that out today, my friends. Oz is out with her sister-in-law in New York City for a couple of days, doing some things that the two of them are just wanting to do, and they're having a good old time. So she'll be back on Monday, my friends. It's Friday here in the studio, Friday everywhere. And it's my pleasure to be here today. If you want to be part of the conversation, as always, you're welcome. Todd at toddhuffshow.com. That's my email address. You can also text us 317-210-2830. Thoughts, questions, feedback. Look, I always say the appropriate amounts of adoration and praise. And I tell you, it's 10 to 15% more than you might think that I need. But the truth is, if I'm being candid, I'm not worthy of any adoration and praise. I just do that. You know why I do that? I do that because the left, well, I'd say journalists or a lot of personalities in general, they do the fake humility sort of thing, when in reality, that's how they want you to treat them. They think that they're doing you a favor by giving you information and their opinion on stuff. I just kind of mock that a little bit. I'm a guy with a microphone who has ideas that I want to talk about and share with you folks, and it's a pleasure to connect with you no matter what you believe. I used to say I don't care what you believe. I do care what you believe, in the sense that I want to persuade. I want you to receive and hear truth, just like I want the same thing for myself. I want to believe what is true, what is accurate, and I want to help people the best as I can, my friends, help them to hear and receive that truth. How are they going to know it if we don't proclaim it, my friends? Truth is too often not spoken, and then that void that's found in the silence is filled by lies. And so that's why we do what we do here on the program. I want to talk about a couple things here today. I want to talk about the government shutdown. What are we on? Day number 10 of the government shutdown. No imminent end in sight. I mean, we'll see. Things can change quickly. But there's no end in sight. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Letitia James and her indictment. I want to talk about that. And then in the final segment, time permitting, I want to talk about illegal immigration. The population of illegal aliens living in this country has dropped dramatically since January, since Trump's inauguration. So that's where we're headed today, my friends. Before we get down that path, folks, there's a lot of companies. We got to face this. A lot of folks out there, a lot of companies that do not share your Christian values, your conservative beliefs. The good news is you don't have to invest in them. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They'll help you screen out companies that go against your faith, your values, and create a plan that's tailored to your goals. They'll also handle all that heavy lifting for you. You don't have to go through and decide, does this company support my values? And it's one thing if they don't support them, right? It's one thing if they're not out there actually giving money for the cause. It's another thing if they're giving money and the from the profits generated in part by you doing business with them or investing in them, and then taking it and funding those things that you're fighting against. And that's what's happening out there, my friends. So what you can do is go to 48financial.com/Todd and complete the assessment to see to what degree or how much or if your current investments align with your values. That's 48financial.com. That's the number 4, the number 8, financial.com/Todd. That's where the assessment is. It's quick, it's easy. I did the assessment. You can as well. 48 Financial, my friends, because values matter and so does your money. All right, let's talk here about the government shutdown. We're on day 10, as I mentioned, here off the top. And let me explain what's going on, because there are people out there, and when I say people out there, I don't even necessarily mean to this in this listening audience. There certainly could be. But I'm saying people that I've encountered in other places, typically on social media, or I'll read articles where people have just the completely incorrect assessment of reality. And that's what's going on here. So the Senate has voted in the most recent, as of the time I'm speaking right now, the most recent vote on the clean continuing resolution, which basically means it's a resolution that would fund the government at levels when it went into shutdown mode on October 1st at midnight that morning of October 1st. Whatever those levels were, the Republicans have put forth bills, clean CR. So there's nothing else to it. There's no other cuts to anything. There are no other additions. It's just basically to keep the government running as it was on September 30th. The funding is the same and so forth. That's been voted down most recently, 55 to 45. Now, 55 voted in favor of it, and 45 voted against that continuing resolution. So some folks out there might think, well, what's the problem? Well, because in the U.S. Senate, there's something called the filibuster. And we've talked about this before. Many of you know this. Some may not, and that's okay. We're all at different spots. We've got seasoned professionals, the hardened vets who can see these things coming. They know how to read, as Rush used to say, the stitches on the fastball. They can tell if it's going to curve, if it's a slider, if it's a fastball, if it's going to break at the last second, whatever. They can read the stitches and see it coming. They followed this for a long time, and they kind of understand the game of politics. There's people who who have been following it for a while, who have a pretty good understanding, but still are learning, right? And to some extent, we're all learning. But then there's the people who are brand spanking new, right? They're either younger and they just haven't had much exposure to it, or maybe they've been living their life and they've been forced to face the reality of the political scene in 2025, and you don't know. And that's okay. That's part of the reason why we do this program. So you might think, how does the majority in the Senate not get something out of the Senate? Well, the filibuster is a rule. It's a rule. It's not in the Constitution. It's just a rule that's employed by the Senate. Every new Congress, every 2 years, when there's new leadership that is elected, they go through and they create new rules. And sometimes there's a fight about discontinuing the filibuster. It's a contentious topic, but the filibuster is a rule in the Senate specifically. The House does not have this. That's why the bill passed the House, even though they have tight margins in the House as well. In fact, by percentage, it's tighter in the House, I believe. I haven't done the math, but it stands to reason given the House is bigger and it's still a tight margin. The House has a shorter percentage, a smaller percentage of Republicans than the Senate does currently. And so the Senate is 53-47, by the way. 53 Republicans. There's actually 45 Democrats, 2 independents, but the 2 independents caucus with the Democrats. They are Democrats in the U.S. Senate. So you might wonder, well, what is this filibuster? Well, the idea is that the Senate is supposed to be the more learned and measured and methodical branch of our Congress. We've got not branch of Congress, but the chamber of Congress. So the House of Representatives is designed to be, it's the people's house, right? Every 2 years, every single member in that body is up for election or re-election. So we can, in theory, although this won't happen, we can, in theory, have 435 new Congress people be elected next midterm. Again, that's not going to happen. I'm just saying they're all up for election, and technically, in a theoretical sense, they could all lose. They won't, but you get the point. The Senate is a different type of animal. In fact, the U.S. Senate, as I've shared on here before, when the Constitution was framed by our founders, the U.S. Senate, they were not directly elected by the people. They were elected by the state legislature. So originally, for example, I'm in the state of Indiana. Indiana's legislature would elect 2 U.S. senators. Those were for 6-year terms. Since there's 6-year terms And since we have elections, federal elections every 2 years, basically 1/3 of U.S. senators are up for re-election every 2 years. And it's roughly 33 or 34 of them. Sometimes there's special elections, but you get the idea. So there's longer terms. Initially, they were selected by a different group, which I think is actually a brilliant way to do it, because you've got the people represented by the representatives. You've got the state, which has, we elected the representatives in the state, in our state legislature. So it's by proxy, I guess you could say, still representing the people, but it's a different type of accountability to a smaller legislative body who has a more intimate understanding of the interests of the state, and how it affects the operation of the state. It just was a good alternative on how to manage run the government. Anyway, that was changed through an amendment, and now we directly elect these senators. But the point is, it's still considered generally, I should say, the same, in the sense that the House is viewed as more of the emotional chamber, and the Senate is more supposed to be the more reserved, the more stately, statesmanship sort of thing, division of Congress, the bicameral branch, if you will, House of Congress. So, but they have different rules. And one of those rules is the filibuster. And the filibuster says there must be 3/5 of the Senate must effectively say that the thing that we've been debating, this piece of legislation, this continuing resolution in this case, can be brought to the floor for a vote. And so debate is not concluded on a matter. And in today's world, it doesn't mean they're sitting there debating at the microphone. Back in the day, it meant that they were at the podium, and people could call for a vote of cloture. Cloture means you got to have 60 votes, 3/5 to say we're ending debate and we're going to vote on this issue. So even though a majority of the senators have voted for basically to call this bill to a final vote, there's still 5 votes short. So there's 53 Republicans. One of those Republicans has not voted for this continuing resolution. That's Rand Paul. A word about that really quickly. Rand Paul, I like a lot about Rand Paul. I think he's wrong on this. I definitely connect with him on the thinking as far as what the government spending needs to happen there. We've got to cut it dramatically. I think the right thing to do, and I'll get into this as we get to the end of this segment here, but the right thing to do in my mind now is to extend the status quo, which it's not good, right? Extend the spending that we had on September 30th, have that run through whatever date. November 21st is what I've seen in legislation so far. That date may have to change because there needs to be time to negotiate. The negotiations as to what needs to be cut can happen in between the new deadline, which might be November 21st, and now. So you pass that, you reopen the government, and you have your negotiations, and you set some hard lines. I'll get into that in a moment. But so 52 Republicans and 3 Democrats voted for this. By the way, I'll tell you the 3 Democrats who voted for this. John Fetterman, who is a Democrat from Pennsylvania. Catherine Cortez Masto, she is a Democrat from, I believe, New Mexico. And Angus King, he's independent from Maine, but he's caucuses with the Democrats. So those are the 3 Democrats, or in the case of Angus King, an independent who caucuses with Democrats. So the Democrats are the ones that are keeping this open, keeping this the government shut down, keeping this chaos ensuing, because that we can't reach. Even though Republicans have control of the Senate, they cannot reach enough votes, 60 votes, to invoke cloture and to call this bill to a final vote. It's gotten so bad, in fact, even the Washington Post editorial board has called out the Democrats for refusing to accept some spending cuts. The Washington Post editorial board basically said there's so much fat here, there's plenty that we can trim. Of course there is. Of course, my friends, there is plenty of fat that can be cut. So that a word on that really quickly. About a year ago, it was probably a little more than a year ago, I made the comment. It might have been 2 years ago. I can't remember, but I feel like it might have been in last year's campaign. I said that we have won the argument on illegal immigration. We had won the argument on illegal immigration. But I said, even though we had won the argument, we hadn't yet won politically, meaning we hadn't won an election to do anything about it. And we still have to get people who have the political will to carry out what the people want. And I would say that's precisely what happened. And I alluded off the top of this program that we're going to talk in the third segment about how many fewer illegal aliens we have in this country today in October of 2025 than we did when Trump came into office back in January, about 10 months ago. So, or 9 months ago, I guess. So, the problem here is clear, what needs to happen. For those who say that it's the Democrats, the Republicans for wanting to cut things and make it hard on Americans and so forth, that's incorrect. That's not why the government is shut down. They can continue with a continuing resolution as though how things were operating on September 30th could be allowed to happen. Now, there's pain out there. You've heard me ask on this program. I think the average American is bothered not nearly as much as they have been bothered throughout the course of time by these shutdowns. There was a time when this bothered virtually everybody, but we've been through this before. We've had some intense political fights. I think the average American knows that the size and scope of government needs to be reduced dramatically. What we're spending is out of control and unsustainable. And I would say we realize, too, that our lives don't change that much. Now, that's for the general population. There are people who absolutely, and I want you to hear me say this, that are absolutely impacted by this. People who aren't getting paychecks, people who are furloughed, people who work for the federal government or do business with the federal government, different people that this absolutely impacts. And I want you to know that I recognize that. I'm not cheering for this. I'm saying that I understand that it impacts a small portion of the people directly, while also understanding that the bulk of people are not impacted much, and candidly, they're not bothered by this. Chuck Schumer is out there saying that he is, what's he say? He told the Punch Bowl News in an interview, reportedly, that every day that this goes on, it gets better for them, for the Democrat Party. So Chuck Schumer's out there celebrating this. He thinks that it's a good thing. So for those people who are in pain, Chuck Schumer is, I guess, okay with that. To have his political wishes met, he doesn't mind that you're in pain. The Democrats, listen, they want to present themselves as this group of loving and caring people. But let me remind you that they say stuff like this. They say stuff like what Rahm Emanuel said all these years ago: never let a crisis go to waste. In other words, anytime there is a crisis, even though there's real hurt in American families, within individual Americans and so forth, look for a way to politically capitalize. It's sick, it's disgusting, but that's what we're up against, my friends. We've got to recognize that and come to grips with that. Chuck Schumer thinks he's winning and every day it gets better by closing the government down. So they own this, is the point. They're admitting it. They admit that they think that it's in their favor. I don't think it's going to be politically. But also they have the power to put an end to this, the shutdown. And again, for some people, this is a huge deal because it impacts them personally. For a lot of other people, it doesn't, and it's not that big of a deal. But the right thing to do here, and I'll tell you that now, the right thing to do, I've alluded to this already, is to, and I'm against Rand Paul on this, I'm for what he's trying to do overall, but the right thing to do right now is to continue the current spending through some date, November 21st, December 1st, whatever the rule, the timing has to be for government. And then you say, and this is where we have to then step in, and listen to me say this, because that's when Rand Paul is definitely right. We have to say, look, and I would go to the podium. If I was the Speaker of the House, if I was the Senate Majority Leader, Trump, I'm sure, is going to be out there and say, listen, be advised be advised, if the Democrats don't negotiate in good faith here, right? And this goes back to my comment about we've won the issue of budget cuts. I said we won the issue of illegal immigration last year. We've won the issue on reducing government spending this year. We've won this. There's no doubt. The Washington Post is out there again, as I referenced, basically saying the Democrats can't refuse all spending cuts because there's plenty of fat to cut, and there absolutely is. And so that, to me, that's the takeaway here. That's the takeaway. And you say, listen, we're going to extend it. This is the last time. And you got to get all these guys in a room. And you say, listen, I know you all have elections coming up. We got midterms next year. There's not going to be, any negotiate. Well, we're going to negotiate, but there's not going to be any moving of the line in the sand. We're going to come up with a figure that needs to be cut. Now, is this going to happen? History tells me probably not, but this is what needs to happen. You sit down and you say, we're going to let everybody know leading up to this, that the American people know that we have to cut spending, federal spending. If we don't cut X percent, whatever dollar a figure, if that isn't cut, then the people who refuse to negotiate and come to sensible decisions on this cut, they bear the next shutdown. And we're not budging on that. If it's shut down because these people refuse to make budget cuts, and I know that these folks squirm in their chair when they think about this sort of stuff, this is the right thing to do. We're going to negotiate in good faith. If people can come together, heck, I'd be fine if we said, let's cut X percent across the board, whatever. Like this is doable. Whatever has to be done to achieve this end, that's exactly what has to be done. And there's not going to be any more moving of the goalpost because this has happened so many times before. This has to be set up properly. This has to be seen through, has to be followed through. The future of our republic hinges, my friends, upon this. The left's out there decrying Trump's danger to democracy, but reality tells us that the main problem is what's happening here with spending. It's got to be addressed now. Friends, really quickly, if you have high cholesterol, if you're concerned about your high cholesterol, a family of heart disease, a family history of heart disease, a family history of high cholesterol, consider Solti. It's an all-natural supplement that has been proven by science to lower cholesterol for folks in the trials. It can do the same for you as well. Potentially, give it a try. You've got nothing to lose but those high cholesterol points. Solti.com is the website, SOLTEA. Promo code Todd's going to save you 50% and get you free shipping. I'm taking a break. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Segment 2 of today's program. It's good to be here on this Friday. I said off the top that Oz is out. And again, we're going to see how well I do with Oz being out. So far, I'd say so good. We'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. So we left off talking about this continuing resolution, talking about what I think is the next thing that needs to be done as it pertains to the government shutdown and so forth. So that's where it stands. I don't want to say much more about it now because I want to get to other topics that I told you we were going to get to here off the top of the program. But I do want to say to you, again, the right thing to do, in my estimation, I don't mean morally right, I just mean the right thing to do strategically here and from a position of just something that makes sense, is to pass a clean continuing resolution, something that doesn't have any new spending or any new cuts. Extend that for a period of time through November 21st, whatever that time needs to be. And then you say, this is the negotiation period between now and here. We have to cut this much. The American people have spoken. The American people have agreed. We are all in agreement that budget cuts need to come. And this is where you need to do your job, Congress. This is where we need to hold them accountable. And I know they're going to kick, they're going to scream, they're going to squirm. They don't want to do the work. Some of them do. Most of them don't. And so we have to hold these folks accountable. That's just the way that it is. And we have to realize it's a negotiation. And I mean, cutting a percentage across the board, I don't know. But all options need to be on the table. And then when it gets to the 11th hour and it's on November 20th, and it's almost midnight turning into November 21st, or whenever the deadline is for the next shutdown, there is no more extensions. That needs to be made clear every second of every day. Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican leadership in the Senate, all these for Trump, that is what needs to happen. That is what needs to happen. We have to wrestle control of this government back from the elites and the statists and the lovers of big government and get this thing back to what it needs to be. This may be, it may be our last chance to do this. You just never know. So that's all I want to say about that right now. I told you I want to talk a little bit about Letitia James. Letitia James has been indicted. Actually, before I mention that, my friends, let me say this. Let me do this really quickly. When your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth comes into play. That's where they shine. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals that are at your level, offering personalized guidance. It goes far beyond the basics. No more cookie-cutter stuff. No more stuff that just works in general. You're at a point where you need specific guidance. You got to bring things in like private equity, private credit, option strategies, coordinated legal planning. This is where Full Suite Wealth can help you tremendously. They help you see the big picture so that you can make confident decisions, not just about your wealth, but about your legacy as well. It's about having a dedicated team guide you every step of the way so you can focus on what matters most, your family, your goals, your future. If you want real confidence in your financial life, if you're looking to build your legacy and secure your future, check out Full Suite Wealth. FullSuiteWealth.com is the website. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. All right, so I mentioned here that I'm going to talk about the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. She's been indicted by a federal grand jury on bank fraud and false statement charges. Now, let me pause because this is something that matters even outside of today's timeline. These sorts of things are important, how we handle this sort of thing. I'm on record, and I'll stay on record, continue to repeat what I've said on the record here, that what happened to President Trump, what happened to him regarding the weaponization of government, the lawfare, a lot of what Eric Trump and I spoke about earlier this week on the program, what he wrote about in his book, right, Under Siege. And his family has been. The Trump himself, the president, even when he was the former president, in that period between his first and second terms, he was victimized. He was victimized by our government. And it's obvious if you just spend a little bit of time looking at this. The politicization of this is off the charts. They threw everything at this man to stop him. They were terrified of him. They don't want him in the Oval Office. It's not because he's a fascist and a Nazi. It's because he's the greatest threat to what they've been building in this nation for generations. He says what he means and means what he says, although he's not always literal. He always means what he's for and against. Now, he's a negotiator. He's willing to throw out ideas, and he's not the standard kind of statesman-like negotiator. He'll just he'll make sometimes quick decisions, but it doesn't mean he's not been thinking about these for a long time. He's got great instincts on that sort of stuff. But he's not a perfect individual. Nobody is. And you don't have to like everything that he says and stands for, his personal style, or like him, his personality. A lot of people just don't. They won't. Talk to someone earlier this week who says, I just don't like the man. But also can see that there's good in at least some of what he's doing. So, but going after him because we don't like him, or going after, by the way, Letitia James as well, because we don't like him or her, because we don't like their policies, because we want to get even, I completely and 100% reject that. That cannot happen. In fact, I've had arguments with conservatives who said, we got to play by their rules. They did it to us. We got to do it to them. And I understand the sentiment. I do. But I also understand that we are not going to fix this, the real problem, by just repeating what they've done. It's going to get ratcheted up. This becomes the status quo, and it's going to get more intense over time. So the right way to do this is to just follow the law. Now, you should not be targeted because you're part of the political opposition, the party that's on the other side, so to speak, the party that's in the minority. You shouldn't be targeted when you don't have political power to protect yourself, but you also shouldn't be able to be shielded from justice. And that's the fine line, and that's why context matters, and that's why what's happening to Letitia James in this case is not lawfare. And I'm going to explain what's happening here. Although the charges, not the charges, but the sentences, the maximum sentences on these charges, and this is not the trumpet. This is what's on the books. It seems a little bit disproportionate to me, but I'm going to get through this and be as fair here as I know how. So she has been alleged to have misrepresented a Virginia property that she bought, that she got a mortgage for, that she classified as a second home. She also, allegedly, has been renting the home. And because of, so really quickly, and I don't have a lot of time, I want to get to this as best I can, and I want to get to the last segment, what I want to get there is too as well. But when you're a mortgage company, let's just try to be fair and understand this for a moment. Mortgage company says, look, we're going to loan out money to someone to purchase their own home. That's typically how most people think about a mortgage. There's some people who have a mortgage on a second home. There's some people who have a mortgage on investment properties. Investment properties are properties that you don't live in that are primarily designed to be income streams, or to be, you're building your wealth, you're accumulating real estate, and you're having either passive income or at least the cost of the home being paid for by the renters and so forth, right? So the issue is that loans for that type of investment for banks are riskier. And why are they riskier? Well, if you're living in a home, if it's your first residence, or even to a certain degree the second residence, this is where your family live. Like you have skin in the game. You'll do anything possible to save that home. You don't just want to walk away from it and have it taken away and not have a place to stay. Like you've invested there. That's where you live. So it's less of a risk for a bank to loan those folks money because they're going to do whatever they can to keep it. If it's an investment property, if it's not cash flowing itself, or worse, it's just a drain on your finances. It's a money pit. That you're more inclined to walk away, and you don't have anything else to lose but the investment, but it wasn't paying for itself anyway. So that's a riskier, not to say that people want to do that. Some people I don't think care, but the banks say, look, we're going to have a higher interest rates on those and on investment properties. So if it was an investment property and not a second home, as she says that it was, she basically saved about $19,000 in favorable loan terms. I don't know if that's the difference in interest, but she would have paid about $19,000 more to the bank if this was a rental property, and she classified it as a rental and not as a second residence. So that's what's at stake here. A type of fraud, misleading the mortgage companies, basically saying it's a bigger risk than what it really was. So I want to get into that after the break. I got to take one real quick. Sit tight, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of the week. I'll tell you, listen, I know it's tough. I know you look forward to this program every day. You're not going to hear it for the next 2 days. And by the way, we've made it through pretty smoothly without Oz. But if you're looking to catch up on things you might not have missed, you can always download the Toddcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can go to the website and sign up for our free email newsletter. We send out emails every day with additional content each weekday, by the way. You can catch up on those issues and look at our archives there, toddhuffshow.com/truth. That's a good use of your time. But we'll be back on Monday as well. So I want to get to this here. Final segment, we're talking about Letitia James, Attorney General for New York. And of course, she handled Trump atrociously. she was way out of control with what she did in regards to the way that she pursued Trump. In fact, she campaigned, basically saying she was going to get him. So this is not about retribution, though. This is about following the law. So when we left off, we kind of explained what she is alleged to have done. So the sentence for this, now this is what got me. Sentence if she's found guilty of misrepresenting what she's using the property for, defrauding the mortgage company, whatever the legal term here is. If she's found guilty of this, she can serve a maximum of 30 years. But in reality, first time-ish sort of situation, the sentence would be much, much less, potentially just probation. So this cannot be, though. This cannot be a get even, or I want you to pay the price because of how you handled Trump. That's not what she was being charged for. In fact, I'll go back to this. When I was on a jury, I've talked about this back in 2018. It's hard to believe, 7 years ago. But I remember we were dealing with the guy that the defense attorney knew that we were going to read some of these texts and think this guy is a terrible person. That was the conclusion that most people would make I'd say almost all people would make if they read some of his text messages. He and his girlfriend were ultimately, I believe, responsible for the death of her 5-year-old son. It was terrible. It wasn't a murder trial. It was a conspiracy trial. It was tough. But the point here is the defense attorney told us, and it's the same thing that applies here. You're going to find out that that my client, he said, you're not going to like him, basically. He's done some bad things. But he's not on trial for that. He's on trial for these specific charges, and you have to be able to be fair. And he's right. We can't say, well, this person's just bad. They need to go to jail for something. Letitia James handled Trump inappropriately, so whatever she gets here is justice. That's not justice, my friends. That's not justice at all. But what is justice, and again, this seems to be pretty black and white to me. There is a gray area. If it was a secondary residence and she was renting it out occasionally, that is a bit of a gray area. But if she said it was a second residence, it shouldn't be hard to prove, I wouldn't think, right? And again, note what else about this case is true that's not true in the Trump case. It's easy to understand. I just explained it. I still can't explain what they alleged Trump to have done. The things that they had to do with Trump with these so-called 34 felonies, it doesn't make sense. They never proved that underlying felony was being covered up with something that's typically a misdemeanor, and then he was charged. It was upgraded to a felony because he was accused of covering up a felony that was never charged or proven. All this sort of stuff. The first example of all sorts of things in Trump's history here with his legal issues. But this is very cut and dry. Did she tell the mortgage company that this was a second residence, and then she used the second residence as a rental property? And if she did, she defrauded the bank because banks would charge more because of things I talked about last segment. So that's what's at stake here. I want justice. I don't want retribution. I don't want a political witch hunt. I want justice for this case. And that's the same as whatever comes from other investigations as well. Again, we shouldn't target people because they're in the political opposition, the other side of the aisle, because they're in the political minority. That should be universally condemned if that happens. But you also cannot behave however you want and think that you're going to be protected because you're in the political class. And then if the opposition actually pursues justice and goes after you for charges that are legitimate, you can't say, well, they're targeting me because of political differences, which is effectively what Letitia James is out here saying. So that's all I want to say about that, because I promised you one more thing, and this is just something I can get to quickly. DHS has announced, the government has announced that over 2 million, listen to this, illegal immigrants have reportedly been removed voluntarily and forced since January. According to a CIS analysis of CPS data, the foreign-born population dropped 2.2 million from January through July of 2025, Non-citizens down 2.6 million. Illegal immigrant estimates fell about 1.6 million. Border crossings are sharply down. U.S. Border Patrol encounters reached the lowest level since 1970. We're talking about reductions year over year. If you look August 25 compared to August of 24, year over year, it's going to be in the 90s, 90% less, 90% fewer. And remember what we were lied to. We were lied to by the media, the Democrat Party, the Biden administration, saying he could not do anything without a piece of legislation. Remember that as we tie this back into what we talked about off the top with this government shutdown. They are deceitful. They are lying. They're looking for a political advantage. And I'm out of time. Folks, thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. I made it, Oz, SDG.